So we had a very passionate panel this morning about how to protect people. But as we've always said, that's not enough. We actually have to help people that have cancer. And so the Life Sciences Consortium is the second major pillar of the roundtable. And I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Mace Rothenberg of Pfizer, who's been very capably leading the task force on the Life Sciences Consortium. And Mace, I think you've got a lot of exciting things to talk about this morning, so I'll turn it right over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chris and Bob and Marty for this opportunity to talk with you. I'm here on behalf of not only myself, but Greg Kurt, who together with me co-chairs the CEO Roundtable's Life Science Consortium. This is the general purpose, the raison d'etre for the CEO Life Science Consortium of bringing together companies working in a collaborative way to get innovative, improved cancer therapies to patients faster. And these are the members of the Life Sciences Consortium, and I'm very happy to say that each time I have a chance to talk to you about this, slide gets more and more dense. We have many of the key players in this area, and I think that one of the things we realize is that through this organization, very much a representation of the CEO Roundtable at large, is that we're able to accomplish things together that would be very difficult or impossible for us to accomplish alone. One of the things and one of the first accomplishments of the Life Sciences Consortium, and again, Greg Kurt was one of the leaders of this, along with Ann Vickery and Marty, was establishing the Life Sciences Consortium as a safe harbor. So it was able to bring together parties who are all intimately engaged in the development of new therapies and the delivery of those therapies to individuals in need, and bring them together in a way that they can interact. So bringing together federal agencies, NCI and FDA, Institute of Medicine in terms of policy development, academia, advocacy organizations, and the private sector to talk about common problems and how we address them more effectively together. And certainly one of the first accomplishments was the creation of the START clause, and that was recognizing one of the impediments to the development of clinical trials and the initiation of those trials in a timely fashion was the lengthy and protracted contract negotiations. And this organization, along with Hogan Lovell's leadership, was able to pull together the template languages from contracts from academic medical centers and companies, recognize that the vast majority of these had common language in most sections, and really then create that as a template that all the parties could agree to that would be a starting point for contract negotiations and allow all the involved parties to focus on just those 4 or 5 areas on intellectual property, indemnification, and privacy and confidentiality, where really they had to iron it out on a case-by-case basis, thereby shortening the process and allowing us to initiate clinical trials in a much more expeditious fashion. As we've all come to appreciate, the Charles Sanders Life Science Award was awarded yesterday to a very appropriate initiative. It was the Project Datasphere that we'll hear more about later, but I think that this is an excellent reflection of Dr. Sanders' commitment to having groups interact and collaborate in ways that really are beneficial to all parties, and especially, as Marty said to begin with, the cancer patient is at the center of everything that we do. One of the areas that we've also looked at was the cancer drug shortage. We held a special meeting hosted at the Institute of Medicine a little over a year ago to look at this. And here again, the speakers and participants in this represent the different constituencies that were present, but also that were representing the different groups that impacted and were impacted by this. From Dr. Chabner, who was able to give the perspective of what cancer drug shortage meant to cancer centers like Mass General and how much of a burden this was placing on those institutions, to Jim Doroshow from the NCI's perspective, Kevin Haggerty from ASCO, Valerie Jensen from the FDA talking about some of the agency's efforts to try and address this and overcome this, and then Gordon Johnson from pharma, actually from the Generic Pharma Association, sorry, John. And so this shortly was followed by an executive order that was issued by President Obama indicating that this was such an important issue that steps were being taken just by order of his signature to address this and put the ball in motion to try and make sure that we were not going to continue to see these drug shortages go on an ongoing basis. What we've realized from many of these discussions is that this is a complex matter and has no easy fix. This was the situation about a year ago where there was a significant increase in the number of drug shortages reported, not just in cancer drugs, but in anesthesiology drugs, ER drugs, even IV fluids. And so the FDA put together an office and ramped up its office and its efforts to address this issue. This was also the focus of much attention in the public media, and in fact, it was even the subject of a short article in the JCO about how some of the drug shortages had adversely impacted pediatric cancer patients. So what I'd like to do now is actually to call on Bruce Chabner, who makes some comments about what's happened over this last 6 months or a year on this front, what his perspective is on this issue, what's being done, and talk about some meetings that are going to be held to address this in the future. Bruce?
Thanks, Mace. I think the situation is changing, and we're aware of impact of this on care. There was an article about 4 months ago in the New England Journal about how substitution of a drug in a pediatric lymphoma regimen led to a lower survival rate for those children. So we know that substitution of drugs is not a good idea. However, I think the awareness, the public attention that's turned to this has probably mitigated some of the prior problems, and the FDA now says that they're not aware of, in the oncology area, any acute shortages. However, I would say this, that at the hospital level, there still is a significant staff of people working daily on the issue, particularly outside the oncology area, and we don't know when the shoe will drop for us in the next in its next iteration, because drugs go in and out of shortage on a weekly basis. I think one promising thing that I've seen is that the FDA now is engaged in talking, at least, with outside providers. And I know one example of that. I was notified yesterday by a company that is engaged in trying to bring in generic drugs from Europe, and I think that would help. And I really don't understand why there are impediments to doing that when they'll bring in drugs from India to solve the problem on a temporary basis. But I think they don't like to admit that there is a serious problem with the generic drug industry as a whole. My own feeling is that we need a much more comprehensive and thoughtful approach to this in terms of how the generic drug industry works. And I think the low profit margins and the lack of competition are negative factors in terms of encouraging companies to get into this, and that I think that needs to be addressed. And it's actually a very small cost of the cancer drug bill overall. So I think small changes in price, which are not particularly popular at this point in the healthcare policy era, but nonetheless, that could help in terms of encouraging entry and competition. But I think it needs more of a fix than just saying we're going to ask you to notify us when the drug is going to be in short supply, because that doesn't necessarily solve the problem. I think here is a long-term problem, and it needs a long-term solution. We have a few Band-Aids in the works, and I think it's probably a less acute problem at the moment, but God knows what's going to happen next month.
Right. I certainly agree. I think that this is a multi-level issue. There are many steps along this path. Trying to fix only one of them is not going to fix the underlying problem. And if we don't really come to grips with all those aspects and address each one, what we're probably going to see is more of a cycle that this has gotten better in the last year and only to get worse in the future. Thank you very much. The next part is to talk about what you've heard much about, and that's Project DataSphere. And in a way, I feel like a presenter in the Oscars, but with some differences. First, I know who the award winner is, and you see them here and in the audience. But the other is even more important, and that is what this group has done is not just fiction and meant for entertainment. It really is helping to improve the way we evaluate and develop cancer drugs and eventually can help cancer patients.